Jeff, you're muted.
Is everybody in, Karen?
Yep, I think we have
Okay.
everybody but Christine in terms of our commission. I don't see Christine yet,
Okay.
but you certainly have a quorum.
I'm just letting her know by text. Okay. We'll call this meeting of the Cornwall Planning and Zoning Commission to order at 7:03 p.m. I am Anna Tamel, the chair. We have members Keith Bodwell, Phil West, James Laporta, and we have alternate Will Evans, whom we'll seat for Stephen Sicardi. We also have alternate Bruce Bennett, whom we'll seat for Christine Gray, and we have alternate Michelle Ship. Is there someone I should be seating her for? No.
No, I think you ran out.
Okay.
Yep.
I welcome everyone to this evening.
Anna, did you seat someone for Steve? I'm sorry,
I did. I seated Will.
I
for
admit I
Steve.
wasn't listening. Sorry.
All right, it's fine. So the purpose of this evening's, early part of this evening's meeting is something that the commission hasn't done during the time that I've been with it, which is now 12 years. James, you've been with this commission for a lot longer. Have you ever been in an educational forum?
I don't think a formal one is part of our meeting. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Oops,
The
Steve Sicardi's in the waiting room.
Okay. The purpose of a public hearing is quite different from a public educational forum. So I'd like to explain that difference. In a public hearing, the proceedings are definitely required by statute to keep the commissioners silent and the audience speaking. The purpose is for members of the community to have a chance to provide their opinions and comments about an action that the Planning and Zoning Commission is proposing to take. There is not room for questions to be answered. Any information that the public doesn't have, it's too late by the time the public hearing comes around. So this evening we have two somewhat complex topics. We're going to devote about half an hour maximum to each one. The first topic is to go over why this commission has spent 3 years and almost 3 months reformatting the entire planning and zoning regulation document. After my little PowerPoint, we'll open for questions for about 15 minutes. And then our land use consultant, Janelle Mullen, will give us a presentation about the new cannabis legislation that was passed by the state 1 year ago, or last year, and which can have implications for the town. The Zoning Commission has some leeway in making decisions about how that state statute will work in Cornwall, and we're interested in helping the general public understand. We are also interested in knowing what the general public wants in reference to cannabis, recreational cannabis sales in Cornwall. And after this informational session, we intend to run a survey of everybody in town that we can reach. There will be an opportunity to access the survey on the town website. The survey will be in the next issue of the Cornwall Chronicle as an insert. And we're hoping to get a good response because the commission does need some guidance from the townspeople on this subject. So I'm going to launch right in now and find my PowerPoint. Is this working? I can only see my PowerPoint. Is anybody else seeing it?
No, if you click on it, Anna, it should work for you. If you select it.
I did. It's there. It's up. Hang on.
Yeah.
Hang on. I see now. I see now what I have to do.
Oh,
There we go.
great.
Sorry. Can I get rid of all this stuff at the top? Anybody know? Oh, well. Can everybody see? I'm kind of clumsy with this stuff. Can everybody?
You can go to the slideshow.
Yeah.
Go to slideshow to make it.
Yeah, if you
Yeah.
see up at the top, there's an icon. It looks almost like a projector screen with a play button up top, like the way to
Six
top.
one in from the left. 6 1 in for the left.
I have a PC, you guys.
So down at the bottom,
in
Anna,
the orange band.
or
There's many ways to access
Yeah.
it.
there's a lot of ways. It's like the little screen.
There you go.
Yeah, that one.
Yes.
Yep. Start from
Okay.
the beginning.
All right. Phew. My
There
God, that was overwhelming. Okay. Well, I wanted to start with why we need zoning regulations. Then I'm going to give a brief history of zoning in Cornwall. We're going to talk about what we did change during the reformat process, and also, most importantly, what we did not change. So why do we need zoning regulations? Well, the answer is that individual humans don't have all the information they need to protect their own health, safety, and welfare, as well as that of their neighbors. The picture in this slide shows what happened to Adam Usler's tailor shop when it fell into Mill Brook in 1938 during the Great Flood of 38. West Cornwall was subject to another great flood, even bigger, in 1955. And at that time, John Calhoun, who most people know here in town, remembers as a young man racing down to West Cornwall to fill bags with sand to try and shore up the buildings in town. So in terms of protecting health, we need to avoid actions that might lead to air, water, or soil pollution. We'd like to avoid noise and light pollution. We need to provide for adequate parks and open spaces. We want to encourage the ability to grow locally sourced foods. And we want to balance the need for social exchange with avoidance of undue crowding. All of these things are accomplished through zoning regulations. In terms of safety, we want to be sure walkways, driveways, bridges, and roads are constructed in the places they are needed and in such a manner as to minimize accidents and prevent interference with the drainage of water. That's particularly important in West Cornwall. To prevent soil erosion, water drainage problems in general, and landslides. Given the mountains and hills that Cornwall is riddled with, this can become a big issue. We need to minimize risk of fire, building collapse, flooding, as well as other types of disasters. In terms of public welfare, I think it's good to minimize disputes between neighbors by agreeing on a set of rules ahead of time. Otherwise, we would be drowning in lawsuits, most likely. We'd like to protect historic, tribal, cultural, and environmentally important sites. We want to provide adequate housing diversity so all residents can rent or live in their own homes without paying an inordinate share of their monthly incomes. We would like to be able to encourage a healthy economy And we want to encourage adequate opportunities to have social contacts and to have our voices be heard. Those are enormous tasks for a planning and zoning commission. The zoning commission itself has a legislative role in promulgating the regulations. They have an administrative role in applying the regulations to applicants who have submitted permit requests. And they also have an enforcement role in ensuring that the regulations are followed. I think it's important for citizens to know that registered voters may petition the commission to consider an amendment of the zoning map or a change in the regulations. Cornwall began its, sorry, wrong button. Cornwall started its zoning history on April 16th, 1940, when a town meeting was held and the residents agreed that a zoning commission was needed. In the beginning, the planning and zoning functions were carried out by two separate groups. And I think for Richard's sake, I'll mention here that his grandfather, Elmer Griggs, was the founder of the Cornwall Planning Council that eventually morphed into a planning commission. What you see on the left are the careful handwritten notes of the first recorded zoning commission meeting in the town of Cornwall. Zoning regulations are not static. They have to respond to historical changes and sociocultural changes. So there were a lot of major overhauls that occurred in the years I have listed. I have to say I made an error here. That complete overhaul with a consultant funded by a grant from Housing and Urban Development happened in 1965, not 1970. And it was at that time that the R1, R3, and R5 zoning in town was created. Another major overhaul happened in 1985. I see Maggie Cooley is here, and she was part of that big revision. In fact, during that time period, there was so much going on in town and so much need for regulatory reform that the Zoning Commission had a permanent agenda item called regulation revisions. So from what I've been able to tell, we've had about 50 known zoning regulation amendments to date. And I still haven't finished reviewing all the minutes. One thing that individual homeowners also need to understand about zoning in Cornwall or any other municipality is that although there is a lot of local control in terms of where our zones are, what the boundaries are, and what you can do in the zones, there are also statutory requirements, and the statutes change. So, for example, the cannabis statute came into being in 2022, and also there was a major revision of what is called the zoning enabling statute that basically provides guidance to zoning commissions. Quite a few of the changes that we have made during the reformat process are in direct response to changing laws. Something people need to understand about zoning, and many people when they first come to town don't. Zoning regulations are considered permissive, and that's a legal term. It doesn't mean you can do anything you want. It means if it's not specifically mentioned in the regulations, it is not allowed. So if you don't see it in there, you can't do it on your land. So this arduous process that Janelle helped us through, line by line, word by word, with several commissioners acting as monitors of the English language, we added 25 new definitions for increased clarity. We changed regulations to bring them in line with recently changed state laws. We created hot links to the state regulations. I think this is a very exciting improvement for people who like to read state regulations. And we rearranged the chapters to provide a more logical progression. The reason the old regs weren't logical was the way in which all the new amendments wound up being fitted into the old document. Things became a little scattered. And we sort of started from the beginning and organized the regulations in a way that moves from simple to more complex. We paid attention to wording, as I've said previously, and we added tables. For example, there's a table on permitted uses now on page 12, where if you have an idea about something you would like to do, you can go to the table and it will tell you what type of application you need to submit. Is it a zoning permit application? Is it a special permit application? Is it a site plan application? And the table will tell you where you can do it and how you can go about it. And in addition, there's a parking table on page 21, which is helpful because the parking rules do vary a bit from zone to zone. We also grouped together very important general standards and approval criteria that had been scattered throughout the document before, so that applicants can now clearly understand why the commission makes the decisions it makes. They can see the guidelines that we have to follow in evaluating any application. And what did we not change? We worked really hard to avoid changing anything that would affect the original intent of the regulations from 1985 or their expected outcomes. The things that we wish we could change, we're going to work on later, one at a time. And for each one, there will be a public hearing with public input. And you might wonder why we're willing to meet once a month for over 3 years to do something that was so kind of a strain on our brains, because we all love Cornwall. And Cornwall has a wonderful history of incredible volunteers, certainly on the Planning and Zoning Commission. I follow in the footsteps of giants, as do the commissioners we have currently. So that's my little spiel, and I'd like to know if there are anybody who has questions to ask. We're going to ask you to use your hands up, which you can find on the button marked reactions at the bottom. What? Anne Trowbridge, you promised me some questions. She has raised her hand. Go ahead. Where's Anne?
Oh, I think she's muted.
She's muted. She needs to unmute.
I'm here.
Okay.
I think the improvements are great. Would it be possible for the commissioner staff to annotate the update to indicate the changes that respond to the state statutes or other things outside P&Z discretion, so that the public could focus their comments on those that were more discretionary?
Well, the hot links that I mentioned are there every time we've made a change that is due to a state statute. And Janelle, correct me if I'm wrong, we do say so, do we not?
Yeah, that's
We
correct.
say as per CGS, blah, 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 some number.
Oh, okay. So all of those are the ones that are state.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, just to add on to that, some statutes have been mentioned without the regulations changing. it's just further information for the public and or the commission to understand the origin of some of the regulations.
Okay,
So not all Connecticut general statutes mentioned would actually be associated with a change per se. Oftentimes it was provided just to give further background.
okay.
It was probably a change, but it happened a while ago.
You mean it was included in the regulations a while ago?
At,
Right, Janelle? Yeah.
at times it was
Okay.
in the current version.
Yeah.
Okay, so it wouldn't be accurate to claim that every hot link points to a recent, to a change that we made. We may not have. But in general, I think that the public can see where a law made us change something. If we can, well, anyway, I can't think of any specific ones right at the moment.
One that I can recall is just around nonconformities. Nonconformities are very complexly governed by a lot of state statute that came forth through case law. I believe that was never anecdoted or never mentioned as to why this was coming forth in the regulations. So that would just be an example of where no change has been made. The regulations have just been further substantiated with that background information.
Right, that's right. Okay, any other questions? Well, that's wonderful then. I can turn the whole thing over to Janelle for her piece about cannabis.
All right. Give me 1 second. I'll grab my presentation. Okay. There we go. So switching gears completely, new information, nothing about adult recreational cannabis appears in this updated version that we just visited. But for a little bit of background, so as Madam Chair pointed out before, in 2021, actually, the state legislators passed the recent legislation to legalize adult recreational cannabis use in the state of Connecticut. That first came forth as RERACA, really great acronym, and then was amended by an act concerning cannabis in 2022. So the state has really been updating and amending over time as these licenses have come to become more relevant and to become enabled. There have been ongoing changes to the state statute. The law, again, just legalized the adult use of recreational cannabis in the state of Connecticut. That's been effective since October 1 of 2021. So effective for some time now. All licenses have been solely outrolled by the Department of Consumer Protection, and that's very much been governed by the state. Prior to this 2021 legislation, palliative use of marijuana was enabled within the state of Connecticut, and that came forth through PUMA, another great acronym, that was the palliative use of marijuana within the state of Connecticut. Some of the language that was first legislated through PUMA is now getting discontinued. So you'll see when we review all of the license types, some of the legislation that was very particular to this palliative use of marijuana is going to be going away as we're unfolding the adult use of recreational cannabis throughout the state. Federal law does classify marijuana as an illegal controlled substance, and it's categorically prohibiting the use of marijuana for any purpose. So as we discuss this, a little bit of interesting background is just to know where state law conflicts with current federal law. We don't really need to get into it for our purposes, but again, important background just to understand. So some local background. As mentioned before, the legislation enabled new license types. We'll get into each license type specifically, and they're issued by our Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection, DCP for short. The licenses do need state approvals and your local zoning approval, much in the form that liquor license takes. So I'm sure Karen is very familiar. It's not very often that liquor establishments are able to make their way into town due to a lot of per capita restrictions, but when they do, anyone with a liquor license, restaurants included, do need to go to the zoning agent to get that local authorization. So it gets funneled through the state and then through our local government. The Town of Cornwall Planning and Zoning Commission did enact a moratorium on adult recreational cannabis license types, all of them, for a 12-month period. And that moratorium is set to expire on November 1 of 2023. So it's time that the town of Cornwall is just faced with understanding where they do want to go on this new legislation. It's important to note that many other surrounding towns also enacted moratoriums for around the same time frame. So when we look to other towns to see what they're doing, we do have limited examples of some towns that have taken action, but many have enacted moratoriums. Some good examples, I do know Kent has outright banned all license types other than delivery because they're legally not allowed to. I'll get into that a little further. Morris has enabled production side of things, so cultivators and micro cultivators, and then Falls Village has very recently enabled the manufacturing aspect. So around food and beverage manufacturing, they've enabled those licenses within town. So what are the license types? The license types enabled by this recent state law can be categorized in 4 different ways: growing, manufacturing, sales, and delivery. You'll see the italics. These licenses that are in italics are less relevant for our discussion and decision-making purposes because they're closely tied to PUMA, which I previously mentioned, that was the Palliative Care Act that is now slowly being discontinued, for lack of a better term. So there's no new licenses coming online. Some license holders that did have these previously allowed licenses are now able to create hybrid facilities and expand their operations. But as far as Cornwall goes, these license types that are in italics aren't relevant for our discussion or for our decision making. So the ones on the table, growing, would be our cultivator and our micro cultivator. I have all the specific definitions to follow, so we'll get into what each one means. Manufacturing, product manufacturing, food and beverage manufacturing, product packaging, and then with sales, we have our retailer, delivery service, and transporter. So to get into each specific type that could be relevant to the town of Cornwall, so growing, that's a cultivator. And it's important to note that each license is actually tied to an individual. So an individual that applies for the application that gets authorized by the state, and then that individual is tasked with finding their location. But the license is truly tied, much like with a liquor store, there's your permittee. So it's tied to this individual that has been granted that right to operate in such a way. So all the definitions come very strictly from Public Act 21-1. It's about a 300-page document that really gets into the ins and outs of all the legislation, very highly regulated. The cultivator, so cultivator versus micro cultivator, 2 growing producer types. They are truly differentiated by size of how large this grow space can be. If you recall, when the cannabis statutes first came forth, Public Act 21-1, there was a limitation around size based upon the town's population. That has gone away. So the state has revisited and amended much of this legislation, and there's no longer a per capita population constraint onto how large a cultivator or a micro cultivator can be. And there's also, furthermore, the commission, and this is the commission, the state's commission is slowly granting enlargements for existing. Madam Chair, I'm going to admit Christine Gray.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And I lost my train of thought, but
They're
commission,
expanding, you said.
yes, they are expanding. So they first came forth with the legislation being very strict around size and population, and they've really revved up the expansion of these producers. The next category would fall under manufacturing. So we have our product manufacturer. That would be a person licensed to obtain cannabis, extract, and then manufacture products exclusive to that license type. And again, very thorough in the legislation. Our food and beverage manufacturer, a person licensed to own and operate a place of business that acquires cannabis and incorporates it into food or beverage intended for human consumption. And then finally, our product packager, which is licensed to package and label cannabis in compliance with statutes. Oftentimes you will see a licensed, someone that is licensed will go after a product manufacturing and their product packaging and have one facility where they have both licenses in operation. Just so everyone's aware that one can do that as far as the state is concerned. And then sales, really the option on the table for the town of Cornwall would be your retailer. We do not have any pre-existing hybrid retailer option because we do not have a dispensary in our town. So a retailer, a person that is licensed to purchase cannabis from producers, cultivators, micro cultivators, project manufacturers, food and beverage manufacturers, and then to sell cannabis to consumers and research programs. Our next category would be delivery. These are italicized because there isn't much that a town can do locally as far as jurisdiction or governance of these delivery services. The statute very specifically says that towns cannot outright ban delivery services from passing through or transporting into their town. So what is the role of the local P&Z? The new legislation allows P&Z to regulate very specific aspects of cannabis, and those include a complete prohibition. So P&Z commissions can prohibit most license types, and I say most because of that delivery component, by adoption of a zoning regulation amendment. So much like the moratorium was enacted, the Planning and Zoning Commission would have to go through a public hearing process if they wanted to prohibit all license types. Should the commission pick and choose, there is certainly, one doesn't have to go all license types or no license types. There's the opportunity to decide based on what the town needs and the goals of the plan, the town plan of conservation development, what would really fit specifically for each municipality within the state. Planning and zoning commissions are also allowed to restrict hours, very specifically to cannabis establishments, signage, very specifically around what can be displayed for public view, and then also place proximity restrictions, much like we might recall that was once applicable with liquor licenses, to really limit where cannabis establishments can locally establish themselves. So the question for the greater public and for the Planning and Zoning Commission, as we see November 1st of 2023 approaching, is really where in Cornwall and what in Cornwall. So should there be any license types associated with adult recreation cannabis that have been enabled through this new statute, where, and also which ones specifically? So the survey that our chair mentioned gets into those specific questions, really asking if there are license types that citizens feel would be appropriate for the town, and then where specifically. It's really helpful in discussing this and thinking through this exercise to really look at the Cornwall zoning map and understand our zoning, and just to get a sense of if there would be opportunity for these license types. If the moratorium were to expire without any inaction of an amendment, what the statutes say is essentially one would need to look at similar uses. So you would look at where is retail allowed in the town. If if the P&Z were to take no action to update the regulations in response to the adult recreational cannabis legislation. So if towns are not proactive in understanding what they want and where, and then updating the regulations, that is just what the state has decided would happen. The same would go for manufacturing. They'd look at, okay, where is manufacturing allowed in this town that hasn't updated the regulations to respond to the cannabis legislation. And I think that concludes my presentation. Most open to questions. It's very, I don't know the ins and outs of all the legislation. It's quite complex.
Thank you, Janelle.
You're
And
welcome.
so we'll use the hands up again for questions. I actually had one myself. You mentioned grow space, Janelle,
Yes.
for both cultivators and micro cultivators. Is that indoor grow space?
I'm glad you asked. So the state has enabled outdoor grow space as well. There was actually, in addition to our 300-page legislation and then our follow-up 30-something page legislation, there's a supplemental that refers to the policies and procedures around adult recreational cannabis. And this question has come up many times. I've reached out directly to DCP and they have clarified that there is an opportunity for outdoor grow space.
Okay, so that's important for the commission to know and for the town to know. The other thing I wanted to mention, you talked about palliative use and the word and the acronym PUMA. To the rest of us, especially to me in my former professional life, it stands for medical marijuana. Any other questions? I'm really surprised.
I
Bruce.
see Bruce Bennett.
So, how does this affect our is this considered agriculture? And will this be under will this have the same opportunities that our current farm bill has?
Bruce, that is a great question. It comes up all the time. So it's really truly up to the town to decide if you would like to include it within your definition of agriculture.
Really?
So if you recall our recent amendment within the regulations that we were previously presenting, we did line the definition of agriculture with the state statute's definition of agriculture. And the next step for the commission is to consider whether or not they want to keep that, because right now the state definition has been updated to include the sentence, agriculture does not include the production of cannabis. You are not bound to adopt that definition. However, it's really in your hands should you decide, does it fold into agriculture? It's been a great debate in many towns.
I can hear it in here.
In the end, I would note that in a previous controversy in town over whether a particular type of production of an agricultural product actually was agriculture, it came into conflict and there was a lawsuit. And in the end, Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, it was settled by the Commissioner of Agriculture, who defined that particular product as agricultural. So I think this unresolved situation could give rise to a lot of problems in some towns that might choose to add marijuana into their own personal definition of agriculture. But we'll see what the townspeople want.
Madam Chair, I do see.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. No, I just see two hands.
Okay, go ahead.
I see Ginny Block and I see Ann Trowbridge.
Okay, I saw Ann's hand first, so go ahead. Ann. Unmute though.
I think Ginny was first, actually.
Okay, sorry, Ginny, go ahead.
Okay. I know, Janelle, you mentioned that the town is allowed to restrict hours. Is there anything about age restriction in the statutes?
Yes, so 21 is, it's very much in line with the liquor license. So 21 would be the legal user and purchaser.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ann, your turn.
Yeah, my question is, how much like Massachusetts is Connecticut's law? And before P&Z makes any decisions, what has been learned from Sheffield and Great Barrington and other towns who have dispensaries and growing and whatnot?
So I'd love to jump in on that question, Madam Chair, if that's okay.
Please, Janelle.
The structure of Massachusetts is very different than Connecticut as far as government goes. So the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has designated very specific towns. It works in a very different way than Connecticut. So it's really tricky to try to compare and contrast from any sort of revenue standpoint or land use standpoint because of our governmental structure that's so fundamentally different. However, some neighboring towns, Morris would be a good example. They did reach out to a producer up in Sheffield to visit the facility for them to just understand what that means for land use, to get a feel of what it looks like, what it sounds like, what the lighting is like. So very much there are lessons to be learned from what's going on in Massachusetts, but certainly from the structure in which the licenses are dispensed is very, very different. And that has just been something. Connecticut's licensing is set up. There's so much, and I'm no expert on this by any means, was very involved with a lot of initial conversations around the legislation, and they certainly kept Massachusetts in mind, but couldn't quite use that structure by comparison. It doesn't answer your question, I'm sorry, but hopefully it helps.
Yes.
Michelle, you had a hand up.
I do. I'm kind of curious on what taxes that the local towns who have these licenses in, what kind of revenue will it bring to our town?
So I'm going to preface this by saying I'm no tax expert. However, all retail sales in your host community, so your host municipality, I believe it's at 3%. So there's a 3% gain that would go to that host municipality. In the first week that Connecticut had their retailers opened, which I think was back in March, I received an email. They grossed, so all of the retailers grossed maybe 2 million. So if you take 3% of that and then disperse it across the municipalities that benefited from that, that's a week of sales. And just for that, so there is earmarked, very specific. The revenue stream has to go towards very specific uses. A lot of it is involved with civic. Just municipalities have to earmark the uses back to a lot of charitable and civic related uses.
So would that be like fuel and food fund and things like that it would go to?
I can pull the specific language, much like a lot of state law is written. It's not specific. It's relatively broad.
Okay, and I'm just curious, so it's only the retail that brings in taxes. So if you had put it in a package and put a label on it, that may not generate income for the town.
So that's a very interesting question. This has come up and been asked to DCP because there's a lot of question around all the transactions. If for example, a producer. So if the producer is selling to someone that's then a manufacturer and going to turn around and sell it in a different town, there's a lot of question, and I'm not clear on the answer as to whether the producer if it were to be situated in the host town, if that producer is in fact getting some revenue that's then going back into the town. DCP has not been clear on those answers. It's certainly come up because Morris is the subject site of potentially 2 producers at the moment.
Stay tuned to Morris.
Yes.
Thank you.
Wow, it's complex, and I guess it's going to take a while for everything to settle out.
Yes.
We'll look for lots of revisions, even of the state statute. Correct?
Correct. And if there are specific questions, I love passing them on to DCP because they tend to be responsive.
Wow, good. I don't see any more hands up.
Janelle, if there were specific questions, how do you want them directed to you?
If you receive them with the land use email and you want to send them my way, I'd be happy to funnel them through you.
Okay.
Do you mind being the point of contact?
No.
Great.
Okay then. So I just want to bring up again the survey. I hope everybody who attended this evening, with the possible exception of Riley Klein, will fill out one of the surveys so that we can get some feedback from Cornwall residents. That will bring an end to our public informational forum, and we will now move on to the formal regular monthly meeting of the Cornwall Planning and Zoning Commission. For the minutes, I will reiterate that the members present now include Christine Gray, Stephen Sicardi, Phil West, James Laporta, and Keith Bodwell, with all 3 alternates, Bruce Bennett, Will Evans, and Michelle Schick. It is 7:49 p.m. by my clock. The first agenda item is desperately exciting. It's to approve the minutes from the special meeting in January and the March special meeting minutes. The January meeting minutes are, if I remember now, a 10-page document. Karen labored mightily over it to get it right. I have read it. I can tell you it doesn't need any further editing. I would welcome a motion to pass those minutes, approve them as written.
I move to accept the January special meeting minutes as presented.
Can I have a second? Thank you, James. All in favor? I guess we're going to raise hands. And Keith,
Aye.
your hand is up. Yeah, thank you. Next, our March special meeting minutes. It was in fact a special meeting because that dreadful storm prevented us from having our usual meeting time. Otherwise, it was fairly routine. Anybody have any additions or changes to those minutes? If not, I'll take a motion.
I
to
move that
accept
we
them.
approve those minutes as written.
Thank you, Keith. Can I have a second?
Okay.
Okay, we've got one from James. All in favor, hands up or aye?
Aye.
Thank you. Well, we have agenda item number 2, new applications. So I'm going to ask Karen to lead off.
Commission members, you received a package on Saturday, which included the front page of the zoning permit and site plans. You received a modified site plan this afternoon. And the reason I brought this under a new application is because it does include a site plan. You approved the site plan for the special permit for what is now a restaurant. on one part of this property with parking and septic, et cetera, and this modifies the site plan in some fashion, and that now there is a change in use of the pink house, which is now white. It has been reconfigured because there has been renovations. And I'll just bring some brevity into this situation. Jeff and I talked about the previous use we're not saying it was commercial. What we're saying, what it was rightfully so, was it was condemned when this property was purchased. So it had many, many uses, but this is a renovation of a historic property that fell into disrepair. So I'm going to, Jeff
Okay, thank you.
and John Van Doren are here to talk to you. You saw them during the restaurant part, and let me see if I can, let me see, where did you go?
I think Jeff wanted to share.
Yes.
Karen, I'm happy, if you want to share, it's fine.
Yep. I gotta find you in my list here. Okay, so I am going to make you, Janelle, you think a co-host is better?
Yeah,
If it's,
sure,
yes, okay.
absolutely. He should be able to share a screen that
Okay.
way.
All right, and I'm just gonna say, I thank both Jeff Morgan and John Van Doren for coming and doing this, because I think it's really important that the commission see what I've been talking about a little bit, is that there is progressive change going on in West Cornwall. They're going to address some things that they would like to see you talk about when you do start to make changes to the regulations, but it's an exciting change, and I think it's important that it be public. So Jeff, it's all yours.
Okay. Karen, you know what, I have to change my settings here for a second, so just give me 1 second.
In the meantime, I will say thank you, Karen, for the nice introduction, and also the reminder that it was condemned when we bought it. I'd conveniently forgotten that fact, but anyway.
When Jeff and I
there we
discussed
are.
what the uses, we said, well, it was condemned. Like, oh, there's no category for that.
Yeah.
It's
All
not-
right, let's see if this will work now.
The zone is definitely within the commercial zone, however.
In the
Yes.
GB zone, but yeah.
GB zone, okay.
Okay, can you all see?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so let me just start. I'd like to just provide a little background, and then I'll frame up what we're asking for. The West Cornwall Development Group was formed by John Van Doren and myself. John's on the call with me in 2018, and in 2020 we added David Allen as a third partner. And as you'll recall, the three of us, we had a common mission, which was to restore what used to be a vibrant commercial town center in West Cornwall. And as a first step, we wanted to create an opportunity for a restaurant. There had been historically 5 restaurants operating even as late as the early 2000s. And but by 2018, there was only one RSVP. And we wanted to, build more hospitality back into West Cornwall to help create energy for other businesses to open as well. The goal of creating a new restaurant was in alignment with the town of Cornwall's 2010 and 2019 town plans, which encouraged economic activity in the village centers. And it was also consistent with how the property had been formerly used, particularly in the 1950s. What is, we call the Pink House, was actually the Covered Bridge Inn and was really a village hub. Anyway, the first phase of the development of our property was the opening of the restaurant in what was the carriage house in the back at 34 Lower River Road. Thank you very much. The Planning and Zoning Commission in February of 2020 approved our special use permit, and the restaurant was opened in May of 22 as Frank Food Company, which is operated by Frank Way, who also lives in Cornwall. And we're here tonight. We've returned for approval of the second phase of our development, which we had talked about 2 phases of development back in 2020. And that's the development of the old mansion house, which we refer to as the Pink House, that fronts on Sharon Goshen Turnpike. We've already done structural restoration and remediation of the building to make it safe. There was a terrible fire in the building in the early 2000s, which put a big hole in the roof, and it went unrepaired for many years. So we built a new roof. We reinforced the structure internally. We removed the old shed wing. We repainted the outside to make it look better. Anyway, we're here now to complete our development of the property because we want to turn that building into a retail location with 2 separate retail businesses on the ground floor and a 2-bedroom rental apartment on the 2nd floor. And we're here tonight to ask, for your permission to go ahead with this. The site plan here that you see here is essentially the same site plan that we had, in 2020. Most of the development of the properties actually already happened. So the parking lot, all the parking has been completed. All of the infrastructure has been put in, including 2 major septic systems, one for the restaurant itself and a second for the Pink House itself. The planned use that we have for the Pink House itself has been approved by Torrington Area Health. 2 retail locations and a 2-bedroom apartment. In fact, the capacity of the system that we installed were what was required by Torrington Area Health was only about 1/3 of what our capacity is in that system. So the only other thing I would just add is that one change, or maybe the 2 changes to the plan from the original plan in 2020, we added more parking. So we added 3 more spaces, which are closest to Sharon Goshen. It's an additional handicap space. We also wanted to include the signage that we're asking for. So we have included in here, although it's hard to read in this, actually make it larger. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if you can see my cursor, but where I'm circling, that is a freestanding sign that we want to hang. It would be inside that picket fence, so it's not out by the road, but it would be inside, the fence. It would anyway, it would be a 4x4 sign that would advertise the 2 businesses. And we also are requesting that we have the ability to put wall signs for each of the businesses, on the front of the building. And again, compliant with the zoning regulations. So, and then one last thing to just add is that the accessible parking or the handicap parking space would be it's the one that we just added is the one that's close. It's right here where I'm circling. It will be added. And we're going to build a sidewalk from that space. That'll be a hard top space. We're building a sidewalk from that space, if you see my cursor, up to the main sidewalk, and then the handicap access would go up the sidewalk, and then this would be another sidewalk where I'm showing that would go to the porch level of the building. And the porch level of the building would be raised to the threshold of the door so that the handicap there would be, ADA compliant handicap access.
Wow. Thank you very much. I think you folks have done an outstanding job. I'm particularly excited to see the handicap accessibility. There haven't been that many new businesses in Cornwall over the last few years. So there's still a lot of businesses that are not handicapped accessible. I want to speak for myself and say that I reviewed all of the site plan requirements in our old zoning regulations, the ones we're currently working under, and found that this plan meets all of them. It includes everything that's required. I'd like to ask my commissioners if they have any questions. And if so, perhaps you could just speak up because I can't see you all at once.
I have a question, Anna.
Go ahead, Bruce.
So Jeffrey, it looks like your retaining wall for your handicap parking and your description of where the sign is going to be is on state property. It's infringing on state property. Is that correct? Is that the
Yeah.
property line?
Well, yeah, the wall, I hadn't noticed the wall, but yeah, I guess that, it looks like it does align with the state property line. To answer your question about the sign, we are requesting that we be able to put the sign in that grassy area. I mean, well, obviously, if you don't approve that, we won't, and we'll put it on our, within, the setback of our own property, but it would be more advantageous to have that sign a little further out so that it's more visible from the street.
Isn't that a question though that you'll have to get from the state?
Yes, that's correct, Bruce. And I think the issue of the discussion of it possibly being on state properties, I think that the boundary is I'm not going to say it's difficult to determine within inches as to where the state highway is. So it's a question, it'd be like a stone wall. There was an old stone wall. Did the highway come to the center of the stone wall and the building on the backside? So that will have to go to the state DOT, yes.
And the retaining wall around the handicapped, that'll have to be moved back. And is there still enough room for parking if that's done? Jeff?
Yeah, I'm sure we can adjust that.
If that has to do with the state, why are we?
Yeah,
why are we
and
commenting on it?
I'm going to intercede, Bruce. This would be a question for Bill Colby, the design engineer, because he's the one that has all those dimensions and he would be working with the state to do that. Yes.
So that's out of our hands. That's not our problem.
Yeah.
So can I also
I mean,
ask
one thing if I could just add, the Bain building has a sign out in front of it, and that also is on state property. And I mean, I don't know if, again, like if the state asked us to move it, we would move it, but it's a lot more practical to have the sign closer to the road than up by the porch.
Sure.
I don't disagree, but I don't think it has anything to do with planning and zoning. I think that's between you guys and the state.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Anybody else have any ideas?
I just wanted to also ask you the question.
Discussion. Okay, go ahead, Bruce.
So you've put no footing drains? Does that mean you're not going to be putting footing drains around the building, or there aren't any now?
Bruce, I'm going to, the engineer of record is not here. That would be a design question to ask the engineer.
That looks like it's probably part of the septic stuff though, because that used to be where the former extension was. They probably had it on there for reasons for the septic, so it's nothing to worry about.
Thank goodness we have our own engineer on our commission.
Yep.
Well, I'd love to see the building used for for what you're suggesting. I think that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for firing up West Cornwall again.
Okay, well,
Anybody else on the commission?
I have a question about general parking. This might be for you, Anna, or
Okay,
potentially
Will.
Karen. What is the requirement for parking for the combination of this multi-use addition plus the restaurant?
I'm hoping Karen knows the answer to that one because I'd have to go back to my
They,
book.
I think it was said that there is adequate parking because the parking numbers for the restaurant were, matched the restaurant, and then this parking is for, the tenant. And I want you to remember that it has been said that there is community parking. I had a chance to speak to Gordon Ridgway today, and some of the parking that would become more tied to this building is being addressed in the overall project that the Board of Selectmen is working to get more parking on the side of the road outside of the you know, to get cars completely out of the travel way.
There's
Yeah.
another answer also, which I'm remembering now. James and I both participated in a process of amending the parking regulations specific to West Cornwall businesses that allowed parking slots to be as far as 500 feet away.
Yeah.
So I think the parking at the restaurant is more than adequate.
Yeah, and
That's
actually, if I may, there's we do have retail stores and personal service establishments. We're supposed to have one parking space for every 100 square feet of business floor area, exclusive of storage space. And accessory apartments or other dwelling units is specified in Article 8, which I'd have to look up. But we did, as Anna just mentioned, all required parking spaces shall be located on the same lot as the building served, except for non-residential parking, which may be located within 500 feet of the building served. And then, of course, I guess my question would be, is there is some time where both the restaurant and the retail space are going to be being occupied at the same time, but maybe not during peak hours, I would think, with the restaurant probably peaking after the retail spaces might be closed, but
our intention is that the two buildings share all the parking.
Yeah.
Are there gonna be designated spots for the dwelling unit?
Yeah, those are on the map. 1 and 2 tenant parking.
Yep, okay, missed that, thanks.
And then I'll admit, I'm bad with measurements, but the Bend has a lot of parking. I don't think it's 500 feet, but there is parking in West Cornwall as well down there. It's a lovely stroll down that street to go up the corner. So I think that also has a way to take overflow of people coming in.
Yeah, that was brought up during the approval of the restaurant. It was specifically tied to the fact that there was parking at the Bend, and also in terms of going further up Sharon Goshen Turnpike in terms of parking in front of other facilities, including the local and whatever, there's clearly shared parking. Yeah.
Yeah, there is parking. I was talking to Libby, and I think there's parking that many of us don't know about at the local. Like there's some parallel along the railing by the railroad, but then there's a grassy section back there that is also parking that isn't really used as parking, and I don't think it shows very well as parking. It would be interesting to look at what really is back there, because that is definitely within that limit. There's a lot back there that I think is underused.
Yep. Well, I think that's the whole collaborative piece that's being discussed in terms of trying to get additional parking. And I also would remind you too that when you talk about shared parking, the restaurant being that the electric bike shop, that parking is almost all in the state right away. So that parking is open to anybody in the village as well. It's not just tied to the restaurant or the bike shop. So that's empty at night. And I know that restaurant people are allowed to park there where there's no problems. I have to say, I've talked to enough people in West Cornwall that there's very much collaborative agreement that they can work out shared parking probably better than we can.
Yep.
Any other questions before I ask for a motion? Would someone like to move that we accept this site plan application as meeting all the requirements of the zoning regulations?
So moved.
Second.
Keith has moved, Phil has second. I have to change my view.
I'm just gonna say not accept, I'm going to say approve. I think that's what you really mean. is it
Okay,
to
thank
approve?
you. I will change that one word. Everybody, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Thank you, gentlemen. It's very exciting.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Karen.
And
Thank
my
you.
all
final
very, very
comment
much.
is we should be so lucky as to have overflow parking in the new West Cornwall business area.
Amen, Anna. Thank you.
Thanks for your hard work and good questions, commissioners. I'm glad you're all on your toes. We are moving on now to pending applications. There's not-
I just listed the fact that we have set the public hearing for the reformatted regulations in May, so the noticing will be going out in the paper. I just also wanted to add one thing. I had a chance to talk to Emily or leave a message and got a message back at the COG. And I will be emailing it over. They do not feel that the reformatting and the work that was done for these regulations to bring it into statutory compliance requires a full review, and that they will have a copy there, but we're all set to go. Yeah.
Thank you. And I just want to mention the May 11th public hearing will be an in-person meeting at the library, the Cornwall Library, at 7 p.m. I did ask if the hybrid equipment was up and running, and it's in-house, but not necessarily up and running smoothly. So
Probably
we're
about a
going to
month.
postpone trying to use that. Staff report, Karen.
I have little to report because a lot of what you saw with the application that you just acted on is what I've been talking about. So that's, I'm so glad to see it's come to fruition. There's a couple zoning permits, a lot of ground mounted solar arrays going in the town, and one new attached accessory apartment, which is, I can sign off as a zoning permit. No outward changes, and it's gotten Torrington Area Health, and she's proceeding to the building official.
Excellent. And correspondence and communications. There were 2 pieces of correspondence summaries from Michelle and I, who both attended the excellent fifth Thursday meeting sponsored by the COG. These are held about every quarter and garner continuing education credits for commissioners. Did you want to say anything, Michelle, the specific?
I thought it was really helpful to hear one, the definition of affordable housing, and then like they defined it with a lower A, affordable housing, which is rentals that are under fair market value. So kind of the question we had talked about last month about attainable versus affordable, they kind of did it with capital and lowercase a. I thought that was really great. And there was a lot of things I think we're going to be talking about when we get to our affordable housing. But overall, I think it's a really positive thing. And I look forward to all we have in front of us. I think it'll be a good thing.
Thank you, Michelle. Any other business proper to come before the commission? Deadly silence. Planning workshop meeting this month will be limited to me announcing that I've asked Janelle, as the cannabis survey starts to flow in, and it won't really flow in until the insert in the May 1st Chronicle, that she work out a skeleton draft for us for a cannabis regulation in Cornwall. And I think she and I and Karen will meet to discuss the survey results before that happens. So there may be some preliminary work that we can begin with.
And is there a deadline to have that turned back in or responded? Do we?
November 1st. We have to have our regulation completed by November 1st, which means we have to write it. We have to have a public hearing.
Right. I think she was asking, is there going to be a deadline for the survey to get returned?
Yes,
Oh.
thank you, Phil.
Well, I forgot to put it on the survey itself.
Okay.
And
I just thought about that as we were sitting here talking about the survey, like
and
at what point, because we do have to take the data, then take it and do something with it and be done by November. So, and people
yeah,
need to
well,
have time.
you know, when we did our town plan survey, I was the collator of that. There were 331 responses, which was a pretty big response. This is a very easy survey to collate. I don't think that'll be the problem. We just want to get, you know, a fair number of people in town to represent the different viewpoints. And I suspect we'll get them.
I would guess we'd want to have it by the end of June or in July sometime.
Yeah, that's reasonable, Phil. Bruce.
So are we allowed to be able to submit this? I thought that we weren't supposed to get involved in decision-making before the decision is made. Is that not accurate?
Very good question, I think. Karen, can individual commission members express their personal opinions in a survey?
You're a citizen, I believe that you can,
Yeah,
that you're submitting it as a survey, yeah.
that's my response to.
Wear your citizen hat when you're completing the survey, and then when you're deliberating and discussing, wear your P&Z hat.
I would wonder, does the commission want to have any kind of discussion about the survey as a commission before we ask Janelle to go off and do a draft regulation?
Yeah, I think you're probably
Glad
right.
you asked that question.
I'm glad you're right, Jane.
I was
I
hoping
mean,
that would be the
I
case.
have no clue what we're
Yeah,
gonna get back
yeah,
from this.
no,
I haven't
you're-
thought about it at all, but just to,
Yeah.
I think that might be a better course rather than
Right.
showing up with a proposed.
I appreciate that.
And I agree.
And
I-
then,
I had my head temporarily on backwards.
Maybe
And
there's
then
an
I have
opportunity, even if we haven't gotten all the surveys back, to sort of look at the first round.
Oh,
that gets
sure.
completed.
We can do that.
Start that discussion then, so we don't have to wait until all of them are. in.
Exactly. We can do that. So we will hopefully, after the very smooth running public hearing on May 11th, have a little time to do some preliminary work.
I have a question as far as protocols of like, people walk up and want to have a conversation about cannabis in town with us. What are we allowed to and not to have discussions with people?
You can ask them what they think. The more information we get, the better. But what you can't do is tell them what you as a commissioner think.
So again, it's citizen hat, commissioner hat, and
Correct.
just be
Correct.
clear in conversations.
Correct. And because none of us as individuals know what direction the commission as a whole is going to take,
Yeah.
we can't really make predictions either. This is one of the few topics where there really is no history to help guide us, you know?
Well, and I can safely say that I don't even have a clear indication of where anyone else on the commission stands on it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it'll be an interesting conversation when we get to it.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be an interesting look at Cornwall. I think
That
we're
there
gonna
is that.
learn
there
about our
is that
neighbors.
too. Yeah. There is-
Also, from a commission's perspective, this is it's not like there's a special permit in front of us that's for a specific lot or this is a townwide thing that we're citizens of as well. So it's not like anybody has a vested interest one way or another as much as an individual application that we would typically see. It's more like a regulatory change for the whole town.
Right.
And so
It's kind of like it's almost like an overlay zone to our current zones.
Yeah.
There will be certain areas where we might wind up allowing certain types of cannabis related activities. The survey itself sort of divides people's responses up between residential and commercial areas. Okay, and that is that, and I'm ready for a motion to adjourn. I can't believe this meeting has been so short.
Actually, one more thing before we do that, because Phil and Will and I had met a long time ago about the kind of
Housing.
affordable housing stuff. And should we put that on an agenda moving forward?
Well, yes, and I'm glad you bring it up because I have been talking for years now about how I've got a list of all the things that we've discussed that we would like to see changed or amended in our regulations. And I've also promised you all to have a say in what order we address those things and what else is on that list. Housing is at the top regardless of what anybody else says. And I hope you can all accept that. It's a something that I've been promising as chair every time I hear anything about housing in town. Is there anybody on this commission who objects to my making that kind of decision without your input?
No.
I would just clarify that at this point, housing has bubbled up to the top. That in general,
Yeah.
we look at a whole bunch of stuff and sometimes other things are more important at certain times.
Right.
And that seems like it's the weak chain at the moment, weak link in the chain. So
So that's basically what I'm saying is as soon as we're done with the cannabis, we move on to discussing housing. And yes, we'll want to hear about your subcommittee. Phil?
I just, before you get to adjourning, I just wanted to make sure that you saw that Riley had a question.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
I
just point of order, just for future, just with sticking to the agenda, just for journalists to understand, feel free to act as a member of the public during public comment.
Which we don't usually have.
Yeah, true. But public correspondence, perhaps.
I think we'll just ask Riley to unmute and go ahead and ask his question.
Hello, Commission. Thank you. I have a couple quick questions. First, on the agenda, it says the public hearing on the reformatted regulations will be May 10th.
That's a typo. That is an
Okay.
absolute second.
It's May
I just
9th.
realized that. Ann and I are, yeah, it's May 9th.
May 9th.
May
And
9th or May
I've been
11th?
saying the 11th all evening because tonight's the 11th. It's
Yep,
May
I have-
9th.
Yep, I have the 10th, Anna has the 11th. It's the 9th, you know.
Okay.
Second Tuesday.
Great question.
Okay, good. And then about the cannabis survey, I would gladly include that in a story in the Lakeville Journal as well. If you can send me any information on how residents can fill that survey out. I am not a resident, so I won't fill it out myself, but I'd like to promote it if you guys would want that.
Well, could you provide Karen at the land use office with your contact information?
Absolutely. I
She's
can do that.
land use at cornwallct.org, gov. Land use at cornwallct.gov.
Okay.
CT.gov, great. And just to clarify on that survey, you mentioned that Janelle may be putting together a skeleton proposal on how
We just nixed it. We had a
Never mind.
discussion. It was my idea. Nobody liked it. We've nixed it.
You're asking all the right questions.
So the survey will just be to gauge public opinion in town before you gather those results and move forward with a proposal on what may be presented to the town.
Correct.
Okay. And the only other question I had, I see the Pink House guys have left, but with the approval of that motion, what's next for them? When will they start putting that parking in? When will the retailers?
I'm issued that the site plan is tied to the zoning permit, and I'll issue the zoning permit and they can move forward with everything else, including building permits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Okay.
So no timetable for when those retailers may be open for business.
You'll have to ask them.
I wish they were still here, but
Well, you
okay,
can,
thank you all.
it's
for your
probably
time.
better if you
I
ask
believe
them.
one of the potential retailers was in attendance earlier this evening, but has signed off now. So I don't know if it'll take very long.
Okay.
So, no, but you're welcome to talk to Jeff Morgan, contact, or else I'll funnel a question through, but they still, this was a preliminary steps because a lot of work was done on the property. Obviously the septic systems, et cetera, and a lot of design, because these sites are so tight that there is just it's just trying to put, as my grandfather would say, 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag. Yeah. And in this case, it's like 20 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag. Yeah.
That's great. Okay.
Okay, thank you all. Thank
We're not used to having journalists attend our meeting. Okay, so now where we were just summarizing that housing would be our next agenda topic. The subcommittee we would start with what the subcommittee had come up with and then take it from there in our discussion.
Cool.
And okay, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Keith,
Second.
James seconds. Is that your hurt arm? How's it going? All in favor, say aye.
All right,
Hi,
Thank you, everybody. Good
thank
meeting.
you.
thank you.
Appreciate all
Thank
your help
you.
and your comments and keeping me on the straight and narrow.
Thanks for your
Thank
presentation.
you. Have a great night.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right, good night all.
Good night.